Be easy on you here this morning. I've got a lot of verses that we're going over, but they're all in one spot. If you want to follow along, it's in 1 Kings then to chapter 16, or I'm going to have all the words on the screen, and then you can just look up front if you want. We'll leave that up to you. I don't know if you've ever been in the position. I know I have, but it's hard when you go and it's meal time, and you go to your lunchbox, and you open it up, or you go to your cupboard, and there's nothing there, or there's so very little there. You go to the fridge, and it's a bottle of ketchup. What do I do with that? And, I hear some laughs, but, I'm guessing some of those come from people that can remember the fact that there's been times in their life when they've had very little. I know I have. And when you get yourself in a place where there's very little, it reveals who you're going to trust. It reveals whether you're going to lean on God or whether you're going to panic, which is what a lot of people do, and hang on so tightly to what you do have. And it can set a trend in your life to where you hold on tightly to everything you have. But it doesn't just apply to people who've had very little. We oftentimes think that we don't quite have enough, and so we tend to hang on too tightly to the things that we do have. And Jim's been talking, he talked last week, and he's just starting into a series on generosity. And talking about generosity, and I always like to go back and take a look at some of the stuff we see in the Old Testament. And the Old Testament, a lot of people think, okay, that's irrelevant to me. It's old. It's got it right in the name. But that's just not the case. It's the New Testament is built on the foundation of the Old Testament. And the Old Testament oftentimes teaches in a different way than the New Testament does. The New Testament teaches in a way that is very much like what we're used to. There's kind of a series of events or a series of points, and we learn the lesson. That's kind of how Paul always outlines things. But the Old Testament very much teaches in the form of stories. Not made up stories, things that really happen, but teaches lessons through accounts of things that have happened. And today we're going to be talking about a king named Ahab. Ahab was a king in Israel, and Ahab is known as one of the most wicked kings that ever lived in either kingdom. There's some other wicked ones too, but Ahab was a particularly rotten guy. And where we find him here, he had just previously married a gal. You likely know her name. Her name was Jezebel. And Jezebel came from a not all that distant country. She came from the city of Tyre, Tyre, not like what you got on your car, but Tyre was an enemy city, and it was a city where they worshipped Baal. And likely you've heard the name Baal if you've read much in the Old Testament at all. Baal was a god that became problematic. And so anyway, we're going to look here in 1 Kings 16:29. We're going to start out. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel. And he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians. And he began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord God of Israel than did all the kings of Israel before him. In Ahab's time, Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of his firstborn son, Abiram, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken by Joshua, the son of Nun. And so here we see the situation that is in Israel. We see the fact that this wicked king, the most wicked Israel had had up to that point, not only served Baal, because we see that there were kings from time to time that dabbled in the worship of other gods, of foreign gods, but he took this foreign wife, she's from Tyre in the country of Sidon, and built him a temple, built a whole temple dedicated to the worship of Baal. So Baal was a big problem. And typically, as we look at Israel, the worship of Baal didn't just replace the worship of the God of Israel, Yahweh, but it usually existed alongside of the worship of Yahweh. And that was the problem. God had always said, "You shall serve no other gods before me and have no other gods." Yet they would have this other god, Baal, alongside of God, seeing them kind of as co-equals. But they weren't. So we're going to take a little history lesson here and look at who Baal was. Baal was a Canaanite god. He was the god of storms. If we go forward one more slide here, we can see a fancy little picture of Baal. And that's a Baal that some archaeologists dug up. Typically those would be like kind of tree branches in his hands. But Baal, kind of a fancy, kind of a sad looking little dude really, but anyway, people thought that guy was great. And the reason was, Baal was the god of storms or rain. And rain is really important. Baal, there was apparently another god named Yam. I don't have a picture of him because you all know what yams look like. But Yam was the god of the sea. And Yam and Baal didn't get along very well. And Baal eventually defeated Yam. And that made him the most important of the gods. And the Canaanites worshipped him. And the nice thing about that was then Baal could provide rain and the land could be fertile. And if you live in a semi-arid region, rain, any bit of rain you get becomes really important. And growing crops depends on rain. So you end up, if you're looking for a god, you might turn to someone like Baal who promised rain. Baal, he wasn't able to hold on to power after defeating Yam for very long. Soon Mut, I don't make these names up, we got Yam and now we've got Mut. He was the god of the dead in the underworld. And he came along and took Baal captive. So apparently the Mut was stronger than our little guy here and took him off to the grave. And then Shapash, the sun goddess, and Anat, the goddess of war, which as I remember was Baal's sister, went and defeated Mut, but it never lasted. Like, it would happen over and over again, and that would create the seasonal patterns as they saw it. And so the Canaanites were always cheering on Baal because they wanted rain. And if Baal was doing well, then they were going to get rain. and if Mutt was doing better and keeping him held captive longer, then things weren't going all that good. It might even stay winter for a long time because Mutt was on the rise. So they would make offerings to Baal and do things for Baal and hope so that Baal would be encouraged to rise up and would provide them with rain. So that was kind of the issue with Baal worship. So it was really a horrible thing in how they worshipped Baal. Because he was seen to increase fertility of the land, he was also thought to increase human fertility. And so often in the worship of him, there was mass prostitution and orgies and even child sacrifice. It was a gruesome sort of worship that went on with the worship of Baal. But then we see this king, Ahab, supposed to be the king of God's people, who not only accepts that, but he's encouraging that by putting up a temple and a statue in honor of this god, Baal. Well, we got one other that's mentioned here in the Asherah pole, and we got a nifty little picture of Asherah too. Asherah is a fertility goddess, and there's a picture of what we think Asherah looked like. The problem with trying to exhume some sort of Asherah, and I found this nice little picture where he's being chopped down, which I like, but anyway, Asherah was made of wood, always made of wood. So you would have this either carved statue, or as time went on, people got lazy and quit carving them, and they would just kind of put a pole in the ground and worship that. I don't get it, but whatever floats your boat. But they would also, we don't know a ton about it because it's a worthless wooden god that rotted away. But it was often associated with Baal worship. They were often worshipped in the same spot, and most of the worship with Asherah was sexual in nature as well. So, 1 Kings 17:1. That gives us a little background anyway. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbea in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." So that's a pretty hefty judgment. We see that, you live in a semi-arid region, or if you live in the middle of the Midwest in the United States, if you don't have rain, crops don't grow. You can irrigate for a while, but when the river dries up, that's done too. So he's saying, I'm going to take your rain away. But that's also, now that we understand a little bit about Baal and the background of this passage here, that's a direct challenge to the God of Baal. Okay, you want to defy the God of Israel? I'm going to take your rain away. Your rain god isn't going to help you any. It's going to be dried up. So then we continue on here. You can understand that Ahab was not particularly happy with Elijah. And so Elijah ran away because God told him to. 1 Kings 17:2, then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook as I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Now, I have never had a raven feed me. It sounds interesting. I don't know how much they brought at a time. Ravens get pretty big. I mean, we're used to seeing crows, but if you go out west, sometimes you'll see full-fledged ravens. They're pretty big, but I don't know how much they were bringing. They brought him enough, and he was filled and he was fed, and this was always one of those stories as a kid that I found interesting, with just kind of the mental image of a bird carrying along, a hamburger or whatever. I'm sure they didn't eat hamburgers, but that's what I would have liked the raven to have brought me. But anyways, it's so interesting. God provided Elijah with food, and he's causing it not to rain. He's showing up Baal at this point in time and feeding Elijah through the use of ravens. Now, that doesn't mean much to us, really. It's a big black bird. That's what we think of when we think of ravens. But if you're in Israel and you're thinking, what kind of bird is going to feed this prophet? You're thinking, okay, the dove will come and bring him, manna from heaven or whatnot. No, he sent a raven, an unclean bird. He sent this scavenger bird to come and feed Elijah out in the middle of this ravine in the sticks. It's really a neat thing, and as we read this passage, we understand that the people of God were up to no good, and God is going to do some really amazing things in the lives of those people who, to an Israelite, are unclean. But that's where we see this headed. So, as we continue on, 1 Kings 17:7, sometime later, the brook dried up, because there had not been any rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon, and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." Why would he go there? That it seems like an odd place for him to go. This town name doesn't mean much of anything to us, but it probably did to Elijah. It was in the region of Sidon. It was in the land where Jezebel came from. This gal who brought over this massive Baal worship and injected it into Ahab's life, he's going over to her turf. He's going to go hang out where Jezebel came from. It's interesting. So he went to Zarephath, and when he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "Bring me, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." So he comes into this land where God says, I'm going to take care of you, and this widow's going to feed you. And he says, okay, oh, this is the lady. God told me about her. She's got me covered. Hey, bring me some water, and I'd like some bread. And this woman's got a choice. She tells him what her situation is, but she's still got a choice. She can eat, put that flour and oil together, make a little cake, cook it, she and her son eat it, and have what they have, or she can make some for Elijah. What'd she do? It's a big choice. Kind of back to my example here. Maybe you've been in that place. You're thinking, oh, I don't have much. Somebody's got a need. am I gonna help them meet that? I don't know what I'm going to do myself. We can understand her situation. So Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make me a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord God of Israel says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." She went away and did as Elijah told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and the woman and her family, for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Now that is some miraculous provision there. God made a way for them to have enough. And you think, okay, so the question that would jump to my mind immediately is, okay, so how long didn't it rain? Maybe she had a little more flour and a little more oil than she really was letting on, and she just didn't have much, and so, so it lasted them a month. Oh well, it lasted them for 2 to 3 years. So this oil and flour lasted them between 2 and 3 years. Meanwhile, they had enough. It's amazing considering the fact that this woman and her son are Sidonians. They're not Israelites. They're Gentiles. They're unclean people. Did God love them any less? God had a plan for them. God had a plan for them. He had a plan for us. He put that plan into place a long time ago and sent His Son to die in our place, that we, the outsiders, and maybe there's a full-blooded Jew in the room, I don't know, but for most of us, we're Gentiles. We were the outsiders. But God is showing even now, even before that, He loves His people. He loves His people no matter what their lineage is. He don't care if you're skinny or fat. He doesn't care if you're bald or if you have a full head of hair. He don't care if you're black, white, or Asian. He loves you. And that's the fact. We're all God's creation. And He sent oil and flour for this widow and her son and his prophet, and He took care of them. So that went on for roughly 2 years before something happened. And in 1 Kings 17:17, we see, sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" Okay. This lady had a poor memory, but let's be a little forgiving with her in the fact that we're all a little bit that way. God had kept her and her son alive for 2 years with a little bit of oil and a little bit of flour. And as we remember, when we meet these first two, what's she say? Let me go bake this stuff up so me and my son can eat it and die. That was apparently far in the back of her memory at this point in time. So she confronts Elijah as though he did something to do this. And so we see Elijah react. 1 Kings 17:19. "Give me your son," Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying. He was staying in like a little tent on top of a roof, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord, my God, you have brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die." Then he stretched himself out on the Lord. Got a little tongue-tied. Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." 1 Kings 17:22, the Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." Guess I didn't realize it for those last 2 years where you're giving me something to eat, but now I know. Here's the thing, though. Look at what God had done. Look at what God had done in a 2-year time span. He had taken the rain and shut it down. There wasn't even so much as dew on the ground for over 2 years at this point. He had proven Baal to be a lesser thing, a non-God. A God's only a God because they're supreme over something, because they can control things. And Baal was only over one thing, and that was rain. And nothing. But you see, God, He shut off the tap. It was done and over with. He fed Elijah via some birds. Birds brought him food on a regular basis for, I don't know how many months it took for that river to dry up, but he hung out in the ravine and had plenty to eat. Then he provides food to him via a pagan woman in a foreign city, and provides for her and her son too, and shows that he cares for them as well. And now, you don't get any more powerful than a resurrection, do you? I mean, this is the ultimate. Okay, so Baal's over the rain, and he can't do that. That was likely this woman's native god. She was from Sidon, so she no doubt before this was a Baal worshiper. Not only am I in charge of the rain, but I am in charge of life. Gives life to this boy. So, meanwhile, back in Israel, the Israelites likely, saying to Baal, "Hey, what's up? What did we do?" Probably making their sacrifices to him and doing their thing, looking to Baal to give them some rain. And meanwhile, here in Baal's land, a woman has come to realize that God is the one and only. It's really something else. And it all started with her choice to believe Elijah and to be generous with him. To be generous with him when she was in a position where she had nearly nothing. So it's just incredible. It's a show of faith by those that were not born into a religion. And that might be you. You know, maybe you were raised in a Christian home, maybe you weren't. But we can see the miraculous things God does in lives. And He doesn't care whether your mom and dad believe in Him. He does care. But it has no bearing on you and your faith. If your mom and dad believe, if your grandma and grandpa believe and founded the, First Community Church down the road, it doesn't matter if that faith is not your own. God is the God of those who show faith. And God also rewards generosity. So, can we trust God? That is the big question. And that is a question that you ask yourself all the time, whether you realize you do or not. Your actions bear out whether you think you can trust God or not. What I do with my money, with my time, with my resources, what choices I make with my children, my family, my parents, what have you, it's all a reflection of whether you have realized I can trust God. Okay, God can feed Elijah in a cave with a bird, but I don't know that He can take care of me. Actually, I know that God can take care of me. But you might find yourself in that place. If I am faithful, if I believe God, if I trust Him, if I am obedient, and I am generous, I can trust God to provide for me. If I'm disobedient, maybe God will cut me off for a while to help bring me back. But if I'm being obedient, I ought to be knowing that God is taking care of me. So, do you have any Baals in your life? Do you have any things in which you place your trust? Israelites were trusting Baal to take care of the rain issue so that they would have crops. Maybe you're trusting your job, your position, your personality, your pocketbook to be your Baal that you trust to get you through day to day. Your health. Health fails. Money goes away. Jobs get lost. Jobs get lost sometimes for no fault of your own. Company downsized. They moved to Mexico. They did whatever. If we are obedient to Him and we trust Him, God will take care of us. We do serve a good God. The God fills oil jars and flour cans can take care of you.